If you feel like you are leading in, well, permanent chaos, what some scholars call a state of permanent whitewater, you are definitely not alone.
No, you're not.
The crises just seem to be accelerating, information is overwhelming, and, social trust feels like it's just draining away.
It really does.
So we dove into your sources to understand why the most crucial ingredient for effective leadership, which is hope, is often the biggest casualty of this whole environment.
And that's really the core challenge, isn't it? Hope is completely foundational, yet this constant flow of uncertainty, it makes it nearly impossible for leaders to sustain.
Yeah.
So if you're struggling to communicate a clear path forward, this deep dive is absolutely for you.
Right. Our mission here is to move past the idea that hope is just some passive, sentimental emotion. We are really unpacking the source material's core argument.
Which is that hope is a dynamic relational capacity.
Exactly. It's an evidence-based skill set that you can intentionally practice and amplify in your organization, even when true optimism seems, well, impossible.
We're going to cover the architecture of hope, the specific ways the modern environment is almost engineered to destroy it, the measurable costs of its scarcity, and I think most importantly, the actual organizational infrastructure you can build to foster it collectively.
Okay, let's unpack this. And I think we have to start with a necessary psychological shift. We need to really define what hope actually is.
Right. The foundational psychological work, pioneered by Charles Snyder, it shows that hope is a cognitive motivational framework. It's not a trait you're born with.
It's a skill.
It's a skill set you practice. I mean, the simplest way I think about it is this. Optimism is waiting for the weather to clear. Hope is charting 3 different courses through the storm.
Oh, I love that analogy. It defines hope as active. So what are the mechanical components?
Snyder identifies 3 learnable components that leaders have to focus on. First, you have goals. You must have clearly defined, desired futures. If you don't know where you're going, you can't have hope.
Simple enough.
Second is pathways thinking. And that's the strategic ability to generate multiple realistic routes toward those goals, especially when the first route gets blocked.
Which it always does.
Almost always. And third is agency thinking. That's the belief in your capacity, both individually and collectively, to execute those routes and sustain the effort. If your team lacks any of those 3, they lack hope.
So that's the mechanical how-to of hope. But the sources show that, sustaining it today requires understanding the full context. And this is where it gets really interesting for me. Later research, especially from Kraft and his colleagues, it expands on this, arguing that modern challenges demand we see hope across 6 dimensions at the same time.
Yeah, this connects the inner mechanics to the external world. So you have the 3 internal dimensions you mentioned: cognitive, which is imagination; affective, your emotional experience; and behavioral, which is action. But then you have these 3 crucial contextual layers.
Yeah.
The social layer, which is trust in your support systems; the spiritual or religious layer, which is about anchoring to some transcendent meaning; and then the existential layer, your orientation toward growth.
So what that tells us is that hope isn't just what's happening in one leader's head.
Not at all.
It's organizationally defined. It's this dynamic capacity to envision futures, trust in pathways, believe in agency, and sustain all that effort across all those relational and existential layers, even when the immediate environment is just screaming impossible.
And when we define hope that robustly, we immediately see why the modern environment actively undermines it. The challenge is structural. It starts with the sheer velocity and the volume of information we face.
It sounds like we're not just dealing with uncertainty, but with multiple, confusing, contradictory uncertainties. I think organizational theorist Carl White called it chronic equivocality.
That's the core mechanism. It means that in any given situation, multiple conflicting interpretations of reality are competing for your attention, and no single clear frame ever really dominates.
Or you're just stuck.
You're stuck. And that volume of competing reality, it quickly overwhelms our finite cognitive resources. This leads to processing overload and decision fatigue. I mean, Daniel Kahneman's work on attention really highlights this. You just run out of gas for strategic thinking.
And when you are cognitively depleted, you stop looking for creative pathways.
Exactly.
You just revert to shortcuts, right?
Yeah.
Which often amplify the stress and lead you into this defensive posture.
Exactly. And the digital environment we're in is structurally designed to amplify all this negativity. I mean, platforms optimize for engagement, clicks, shares, and content that triggers outrage or fear just captures attention far more reliably than nuanced analysis does.
So our natural human tendency to focus on the negative gets put on steroids.
It's systematically reinforced, yeah. It makes positive pathway thinking a real uphill battle.
Okay, so you got leaders swimming in this torrent of confusing, alarming signals. And at the same time, the relational foundations they need to process it all are just weakening. The sources talk about a simultaneous decline in social cohesion, whether that's, declining trust in institutions or just the increasingly transactional nature of workplace relationships, a trend Putnam documented years ago.
And the takeaway is crystal clear. When information overload compromises the cognitive pathways and social fragmentation compromises the relational support systems, the dynamic capacity for hope gets hit from both sides.
And this leads directly to measurable, very costly outcomes.
It does.
Okay, so let's get concrete about those costs. If hope is organizational infrastructure, what happens when that infrastructure fails?
Well, the organizational penalty is severe. Leader hopelessness doesn't just feel bad. It actually predicts decreased employee engagement, higher turnover, and a shift toward purely defensive strategic planning.
So you're only focused on risk mitigation, not on opportunity.
Exactly. You're just trying not to lose instead of trying to win.
And this isn't just about morale, right? This hits the bottom line. You mentioned some specific data.
We did. Multiple studies show that hopeful leadership is associated with a 0.35 standard deviation increase in employee performance.
Wow.
But the gap between high hope and low hope organizations is even starker. Firms that score in the bottom quartile of leadership psychological capital, and hope is a part of that, they demonstrate 17% lower profitability and 21% lower productivity compared to top quartile firms.
That's massive.
It is. Hope is fundamentally a performance metric.
So the difference between having or not having this capacity is, it's the difference between leading a profitable operation and a stagnant one. And on the individual side, low hope creates actual physical stress.
Oh, absolutely. The sustained uncertainty under low hope leadership creates psychological stress. We're talking elevated cortisol, increased anxiety, higher rates of burnout. The lack of clear direction and perceived agency, it undermines individual well-being because people just feel trapped.
And that feeling, that uncertainty, it transmits outward, doesn't it? We see a direct negative feedback loop with stakeholders too.
You do. Look at healthcare. Staff hopelessness correlates with lower patient satisfaction and increased medical errors.
That's terrifying.
It is. In education, teacher hope is a huge predictor of student academic achievement. So when leaders fail to model pathways thinking, that uncertainty is transmitted directly to the students and clients they're supposed to serve.
So the real long-term cost is cultural. It's the development of learned helplessness. That concept Seligman studied.
That's it. Employees start to expect that their effort won't influence outcomes, which just concentrates the hopelessness and requires immensely costly cultural repair to break that cycle.
Okay, so if the problem is learned helplessness, the answer has to be learned agency.
It has to be.
And that brings us to the actionable toolkit. The sources lay out 3 intentional practices leaders can implement immediately. Let's start with communication.
The first step is what we'll call transparent communication. Naming reality without amplifying despair. This is all about balancing the acknowledgement of hard realities like permanent uncertainty with providing structure and purpose.
So the key concept here is what Heifetz calls pacing, regulating the rate your organization confronts its challenges. It means you have to resist the urge to deliver total certainty even when you crave it yourself.
Right. You have to separate facts from interpretation.
And honestly acknowledge the emotional impact this uncertainty has on your team.
Yeah, the Cleveland Clinic provided a brilliant example of this during the 2020 pandemic. The CEO and the chief communications officer, they hosted daily briefings. They shared real-time data on supply and capacity.
Okay.
But crucially, they explicitly stated what was unknown and why they were making certain decisions under that ambiguity. Staff surveys later showed that 87% felt informed despite unprecedented levels of uncertainty.
So that's hope built on clarity, not on false assurances. But communication only creates this space, right? You need action to prove that pathways actually exist. That brings us to the second practice. Designed moments of collective efficacy.
This is all based on Bandura's principle that collective efficacy, which is just the belief that a group can influence outcomes, grows through mastery experiences. So leaders have to intentionally engineer small wins. Concrete, achievable accomplishments that restore momentum.
This is how you generate actual evidence that contradicts that narrative of helplessness.
Yeah.
So you're talking about things like time-bounded improvement sprints, visible progress markers, maybe skill-building challenges.
Yes. Consider Patagonia's environmental internship program. Employees can take paid leave to work with environmental organizations, and when they come back, they share stories of tangible impact.
So they're seeing the results firsthand.
It reinforces that small group action yields results, and you can contrast this with something like Toyota's Kaizen system, a very structured way to generate that same efficacy through continuous, incremental, daily improvements that get celebrated at the team level. Different methods, same principle, engineering small wins.
Okay, so if the short-term path is blocked, you need to look higher up. That's the third practice, purpose reconnection, which acts as the ballast.
When the immediate conditions feel overwhelming, connecting back to the core mission provides that necessary anchoring and emotional stability. It's a direct line to Frankl's work on meaning.
The practice here is just regular, intentional storytelling that links the daily, maybe mundane tasks to the actual stakeholder impact.
Right. Medtronic is the classic example here. Their entire leadership structure is centered on their mission to alleviate pain, restore health, and extend life.
I've heard about this.
New employees, they get a mission medallion, and their training includes first-hand patient testimonials. This constantly connects the immediate tasks like manufacturing one specific part to the ultimate human impact. It anchors hope in something transcendent, not just the quarterly results.
Okay, so moving beyond the leader's individual toolkit, the sources detail how organizations can institutionalize hope, making it part of the core infrastructure for long-term resilience.
Absolutely. The first system is distributed sense-making and leadership. The cognitive burden of all this complexity is simply too heavy for any single leader.
Especially when facing that equivocality we talked about.
Yes. So distributed sense-making involves engaging diverse members of the team in interpreting challenges. This both generates richer insights and, crucially, it distributes the emotional work.
It's about making sure the complexity doesn't just sit on one person's shoulders.
Right.
We see this at Microsoft under Satya Nadella. He consciously shifted the culture from know-it-all to learn-it-all.
A huge shift.
Senior leaders started presenting strategic questions, not answers, to employee groups. And this built collective confidence and distributed the psychological effort of making sense of the entire industry landscape.
And if you pair that with distributed leadership structures like W. Gore's lattice system, where leadership emerges through contribution, not just hierarchy, you ensure the system has redundancy. It has resilience when individual leaders struggle.
We also need to talk about structured reflection and recovery. Our cognitive and emotional resources, which we noted are finite, they deplete. They require active restoration, not just, passive rest.
Right. Rest has to be treated as a strategic necessity. If the work environment burns out the hope capability, the organization has to invest in recovery.
So let's look at an example.
Deloitte recognized this, and they introduced their timeout sabbatical program. They offer partners 3 to 6 months of paid leave, and the post-sabbatical surveys showed that 94% reported renewed energy and commitment. It demonstrates that active restoration strengthens long-term capacity.
But no amount of vision casting or mandated reflection works if people can't pay their bills. And that's why material foundations and measurement are so critical.
Yes. Hope rests on material conditions. If employees are struggling with chronic financial insecurity or unsupported health crises, all their psychological resources are dedicated to survival, not possibility.
So you have to create that foundation first.
You have to. Investing in employee well-being, financial security, mental health support, flexible work, it creates the necessary groundwork for hope to flourish. Look at Costco's strategy of above-market pay and benefits. It results in dramatically lower turnover.
I think it's like 1/6 the industry average.
Something like that. It's because that material support builds organizational commitment, and it frees up psychological resources to focus on the future.
And finally, what gets measured gets attention. Organizations have to actually track hope, psychological safety, and these related indicators.
That's the accountability piece, isn't it? Google's Project Aristotle famously identified psychological safety, the belief that risk-taking is welcome, as the strongest predictor of team success.
Right.
And once they knew that, they built tools to measure and cultivate it. They systematically strengthened the conditions necessary for collective hope. Measurement transforms hope from an abstract idea into an actionable, monitored metric.
So when we pull it all together, what does this all mean? Leading with hope is not about ignoring bad news or, defaulting to false optimism.
No.
It is about implementing intentional practices across cognitive, relational, and material domains that define, cultivate, and measure capacity. The organizations that succeed in this permanent whitewater treat hope not as a nice-to-have feeling, but as core organizational infrastructure.
And critically, the source material shows that the very practice of hope is itself hope-generating. When you engage colleagues in sense-making, when you invest in their well-being, celebrate small wins, and constantly reconnect with purpose, you are actively demonstrating agency.
So the actions themselves create the evidence.
The actions provide concrete evidence to yourself and to your colleagues that possibility exists and that pathways can be forged, even if they aren't immediately clear.
We'll leave you with this final thought suggested by the research. Hope is a developmental capacity that grows through experience. So when you face those inevitable moments where hope feels absent, will you treat those struggles as personal failures to be hidden, or as signals demanding attention and developmental material to be engaged collectively with your team? The difference really defines resilient leadership.
I earned my degree online at Arizona State University. I chose to get my degree at ASU because I knew that I'd get a quality education, they were recognized for excellence, and that I would be prepared for the workforce upon graduating. To be associated with ASU, both as a student and alum, it makes me extremely proud, and having experienced the program, I know now that I'm set up for success. Learn more at asuonline.asu.edu.
At Arizona State University, we're bringing world-class education from our globally acclaimed faculty to you. Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Learn more at asuonline.asu.edu.